Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Ron Johnson.
Well, good evening. Good evening. So they told me now I can say I performed at the Kennedy Center, so appreciate that. First of all, it's a real honor and privilege to come here and introduce Aaron Siri to you. Wasn't quite sure who would be comprising the audience. I'm hoping you're fans, as I am, of Aaron Siri. Okay, good. So, you know, I come from the private sector, so I'm not a real fan of lawyers. I mean, like no offense. I mean, I paid way too much money for whatever representation I had. When I came here to the Senate, though, I never really intended to be an investigator, do a lot of oversight, but that became my role. And now that I've seen how much congressional oversight is atrophied over the years, how I've seen how effective the adversarial process and lawyers can be at extracting information from a government that's much too large, I've gained a new respect for the legal profession. Because it's just true. I mean, as much as I've got the constitutional authority to try and extract information from the agencies, they realize I've got very little enforcement power. The enforcement power lies in the courts, and that's through the legal system. So from my standpoint, the reason I'm so honored to introduce Aaron Siri is I truly believe that he may be the most consequential attorney in my lifetime. Now, that's saying a lot. And there may be a few doctors in the crowd here, too, so you maybe don't like what I'm going to say next. If he had an MD behind his name, he might be the most influential MD in my lifetime. Now, I didn't know Aaron Siri from Adam, quite honestly, until COVID hit, and I think COVID opened up an awful lot of our eyes. Aaron Siri came to my attention when I was holding hearings, when I was holding public events, and my first public event on vaccine injuries occurred in June of 2021 in Milwaukee, where Ken Ruckers, a Green Bay Packer lineman, his wife was vaccine injured, and I just offered, well, can't do much other than I can give you a platform to tell your stories. A number of months later, in November 2nd, 2021, we took that type of hearing, public event, to Washington, D.C., where we had the vaccine injured together with a lot of medical experts as well. And so I had my expert panel on, we called it vaccine mandates. We should have called it injection injuries. And I got in contact with Aaron Siri because he was representing Dr. Patricia Lee, who's one of the first doctors who came up publicly talking about the injection injured. And what Aaron testified in that event talked about all the calls he was getting into his practice. Some of those calls came from doctors who were vaccine injured, doctors who were trying to get treatment and they couldn't get it. The doctors they sought treatment from said, "We don't believe you." And of course, Dr. Patricia Lee finally got a meeting with the officials at the CDC, the FDA. One of them was Dr. Peter Marks, who talked about, oh, how wonderful the VAERS system was, and we're not seeing anything. And so the main point that Aaron made at that public hearing is that until the federal health agencies, until the medical establishment acknowledge the vaccine, the injection injuries, these people won't get treatment. Now, the very sad fact of the matter is, here we are 4 or 5 years later, they still haven't admitted it. And people are not getting treatment. It's a very sad fact. But again, it was Aaron's advocacy for, at that point, Dr. Patricia Lee that put him on my radar. And then I had him also testify at an event we held on December 7th, 2022. That was titled COVID-19 Vaccines, What They Are, How They Work, and Possible Causes of Injuries. And that was the event where Aaron Siri released the results of the vSafe data system. It took him 1.5 years and 2 lawsuits to extract that information from a system that was set up to provide the information to the public. And of course, what he revealed is out of 10 million people in that voluntary survey, 7.7% sought medical care. 25% either had they were unable to work or conduct their normal daily activities. Again, that was a groundbreaking revelation, and yet the media just ignored it. Fast forward about 3 years, once I became chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee Investigation, one of my primary focuses has been really the corruption of science, the capture and corruption of our federal health agencies. So, of course, I called Aaron Siri to testify. And that was the hearing in which he really laid out the fact that all of these, the safe and effective is all based on faulty science. We do not have rigorous science backing up the childhood vaccine schedule. We simply don't have it. It doesn't exist. And at that hearing, my ranking member had this Commonwealth Fund study saying there are going to be 3 million lives saved by the COVID vaccine. And one of the things I love about Aaron is he's an attorney who uses numbers. I'm an accountant. I like numbers. And that claim is so easy to disprove. And I just want you to follow my numbers here. 2019, there were 2.85 million deaths in the U.S. Remember that, 2.85. We'll round up to 2.9. Now, population has increased about 1.5 times since then. So you'd expect in 2022, the death rate would have been about 2.9, just a little over 2.9, right? Here's what actual deaths actually were. So the year before the pandemic, we had 2.9 million deaths in America. The year of pandemic, 3.4. 500,000 people, probably the least healthy, the ones that COVID could really attack, 500,000 additional deaths, 3.4. Now, you'd assume if the vaccine was that effective, we would have gone back down to something closer to 2.9, right? That didn't happen. 2021, the year of the vaccine, this safe and effective injection, we had 3.5 million deaths. 2022, back down a little bit to 3.3. So we never returned after this injection that was going to save us from the pandemic. We never returned to a reasonable level of about 2.9 million deaths. And to assume that the vaccine saved 3 million lives, obviously it didn't. But to assume it did, you'd have to assume that we were going to go from 2.9 million deaths in 2019 to 5 million deaths in 2021 and 2022. It's farcical. And yet, that's what people cling to. That's the narrative, right? It's like, save 3 million lives. Pardon my French, it's bullshit. And in that hearing, this is where Aaron really started laying out the truth of vaccines and how it's the only product that we can't sue the manufacturers for, and that the health agencies are hopelessly conflicted. You can't promote vaccines and at the same time assure their safety. So that he started laying the groundwork for what I think later became the subject of tonight's talk, his excellent book, Vaccines, Amen. The last hearing I had him at, September 9th, 2025, that title was How the Corruption of Science Has Impacted Public Perception Policies Regarding Vaccines. By the way, I want to step back. Starting back in November of 2021, there were about 18,000 deaths reported on VAERS in November 2021. 32.5% of those are occurring on the day of the vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. Fast forward to September 9th of 2025, we're up to 38,000, almost 39,000 deaths, and 24% of those occurring on either the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. And go back to what the FDA CDC was telling these doctors, like, nothing to see here, VAERS is great. Until all of a sudden VAERS isn't great, all of a sudden they're saying that there's a bunch of cranks, a bunch of anti-vaxxers loading in false information. It's a scandal in and of itself. But anyway, during this time period, I'd finally watched the excellent deposition that Aaron Siri had of Stanley Plotkin. And if you haven't seen it, it's probably worth, maybe not the full 9 hours. I watched the full 9 hours. I hope I can. I hope Aaron has put together a highlight reel of that, because it just shows it just shows how craven these individuals are that are pushing safe and effective, and there's just nothing, there's no science to back it up whatsoever. In that hearing, he talked about the Institute of Medicine. They assessed the safety of CDC's childhood vaccine schedule, and they concluded, quote, "Studies designed to examine the long-term effects of the cumulative number of vaccines have not been conducted." Again, they were charged to prove that these things are safe. They haven't conducted the studies, but this is what they were coming out with. And by the way, there's a great book by Gavin DeBecker that really goes in depth about this Institute of Medicine study. But they concluded there's no evidence that the schedule is not safe. That's as good as they could say, which of course means there's no evidence they can say that it is safe. And again, Aaron pointed that out. Finally, at that hearing was where he re-released the Henry Ford study. A real-world study of 18,000 children between 2000 and 2016. The conclusion of that one is that the vaccinated population, this is the only study where you have vaxxed versus unvaxxed, about 16,000 vaxxed, about 2,000 unvaxxed. So you can really tell, is there a difference? And there's a difference. The vaxxed population have 2.5 times the rate of chronic illness overall. Much higher different types of chronic illnesses. So again, that to me was groundbreaking, and of course the study wasn't released. We had to do it in a Senate hearing because it did not match the narrative of the pro-vaccine crowd. So this event, and I'll conclude on this note, because if you haven't read Vaccines, Amen, you should. Their earlier books, Dissolving Illusions, excellent book by Suzanne Humphreys. Turtles All the Way Down. Peter McCulloch's, his Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, Reality. But if you're going to only read one book, I would really recommend, I've been recommending Vaccines, Amen. Because it's just a seminal work. It kind of combines all of that information, and again, uses charts, and I'll end on this note. There's a chart on page 84, and I think this is just brilliant on the part of Aaron. He lays out the number of deaths in the year before a vaccine was available for all these childhood illnesses. So if you total them all up, and again, you've heard, vaccines save millions of lives. Now, I did Grok, I did Perplexity today. What is the real claim on an annual basis? Annual basis, they're claiming about 37,000 deaths per year saved by vaccines, right, in the U.S. In total, there were 4,906 deaths of all those childhood diseases the year before the vaccine came on board. Of course, Suzanne Humphreys in Dissolving Illusions shows that the rate of these diseases, the rate of deaths from these diseases had declined by 95, 96, 99% before any vaccine was ever introduced. But again, they credit vaccines with all these lives saved. Once again, to use the word, it's bullshit. So again, I'm just so honored to be here to introduce somebody who, again, I think is just the most consequential lawyer in my lifetime, because I think his groundbreaking work, his ability to explain things in just easy to understand terms, the courage of fighting the powerful interests that he's fighting, is just unmatched, it's unparalleled. And even better yet, he's winning. He's making a real impact. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Aaron Siri.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. Wow, I've got a lot to live up to. That was, those were big words. Thank you, Senator. All right, well, I'm going to have to fill the shoes and the promise that Senator Johnson just made about the work I've done and what I can do to hopefully give you insight into the products that we're going to discuss tonight, vaccines. So there is an urgent need to make all kinds of changes at HHS if we're going to address chronic health issues in this country. And one of those major changes we need to address are reforms regarding vaccines. Just a few disclaimers, though I think Senator already made them all for me. I'm the managing partner of Siri and Glimstad. It's a law firm with over 100 individuals. And we have many practices. One of them is relating to vaccines. I believe we have the largest vaccine practice in the world that does not represent pharmaceutical companies. I'm also the host of Inform with Aaron Siri, and I wrote a book that Senator Johnson just mentioned, Vaccines, Amen. I'm going to go through some basics just to set the table, and then we're going to get into some of the evidence and details, because the evidence matters. It's critical. So, as Senator Johnson mentioned, vaccines have immunity for liability for the injuries they cause. The manufacturers and the administrators do. Vaccines are, in fact, the only product in America, the only one, where I can't bring a lawsuit to claim, had you made that product safer, this child would not have a cardiovascular issue, a neurological issue, an immunological issue, would not be dead. It's the only one. And that's because of a law called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. As the law states, quote, no person may bring a civil action against a vaccine administrator or manufacturer for damages arising from a vaccine-related injury or death, end quote. And as the U.S. Supreme Court confirmed when there was an attempt to challenge this basically blanket of immunity, that, quote, we hold that the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act preempts all design defect claims. Those are claims that you could have made the product safer for injury or death caused by vaccine side effects. That is the law of the land. How did this law come about? Well, let me tell you how it came about. Leading up to 1986, there were only 3 routine vaccines: MMR, DTP, and OPV. That's it. 3 routine childhood vaccines. That's the whole schedule in 1986, right there, up on your screen. Actually, that's the 1983 schedule. There wasn't another one created until '89. The amount of harm and injury caused by those 3 products were so great that every single company making those vaccines went out of business or stopped making them. Now, lots of industries face this crossroad. Lots of industries. Remember when there was asbestos in building materials and in the popcorn ceiling? What'd they do? Did they leave the asbestos in? Just give them immunity and say, hey, you keep selling that stuff? Buildings are really important. You can keep selling it. No. They forced them to make a better, safer product. How about when gas tanks were exploding? To give them immunity, say, oh, cars are really important. Can't get people to the hospital. We're just going to give you immunity. No. Make a better gas tank. Go industry by industry. Find me an industry and I'll find you a crossroads they face at some point in history. Even baby powder, right? Okay. The thing you all thought were so, okay. The point is that in Congress, in its wisdom, did something different with vaccines it did not do with any other product. It said to the companies, you know what we're going to do? Instead of making you sell create a better, safer product, we're just going to make it so nobody can sue you. No matter how many kids you kill or injure, even if you could have made the product safer. Vaccines are the only product that has that permanent liability. And Congress didn't just give them immunity for OPV, DTP, and MMR. It gave it for any other routine childhood vaccine developed thereafter. Hence, help understand, by the way, why there's so much fight over whether a vaccine is routine or not on the CDC schedule. We'll put that aside. Okay. Now, Congress, to its credit, I think, understood that it eliminated the way you assure product safety. It's the economic self-interest of the company. Who here has stock? Raise your hand. Who has a retirement account? I don't, okay. If anybody's not raised their hand, all right, everybody pretty much. Okay. Where do you want your stock to go? Up or down? Oh, you want it to go up? Okay, good. Anybody want it to go down? Anybody?
Only if I'm short selling.
Okay. You want it to go up. And how does, so what does that do? Who else wants it to go up? Wall Street does, the investors do, the CEO does, everybody down the chain that has stock options in the company. Everybody has an alignment of interest for the company's stock to go up. And that conforms corporate conduct. It drives how they make decisions. It drives how they conduct, for example, clinical trials, how they do post-licensure safety, how they do recalls, you name it. Okay? Now, normally, the profit incentive, that economic self-interest, is a good thing because it drives the company to make a better, safer product and test it before it goes out to market and so forth. Congress recognizing, I hope, this is the reason, that it eliminated that economic interest, that market incentive. It broke the economic self-interest of pharma companies to assure the safety of its vaccines. Instead, added a section to that law, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which I will call the 1986 Act, okay, called the Mandate for Safer Childhood Vaccines. That's the entire section of law right there. You see it on your screen. It was codified at 42 U.S.C. 300A-27. I view this one section of law as basically underpinning all vaccine safety in America because since the manufacturers don't have an economic self-interest to do it, we got to rely on our federal health authorities to do it, okay? And this is the provision that mandated that they'd make the product safer. It has 3 simple provisions. It basically is what put HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, in which CDC, FDA, NIH, and so forth are located, it put them in the shoes of the pharmaceutical companies. And it has 3 simple provisions. The first provision, called the General Rule, says the Secretary of HHS, currently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is responsible for assuring vaccines are safer in every possible domain. You can look at that list another time. It's pretty much anything you can imagine: distribution, licensure, you name it, everything. Section B creates a task force for safer childhood vaccines that is supposed to be comprised of the head of NIH, CDC, and FDA. And its sole job is to make recommendations to the Secretary on how to improve vaccine safety. Okay? Simple enough, right? And the third section is it requires that the Secretary of HHS every 2 years submit a biannual report to Congress on what HHS has done to make vaccines safer over the prior 2 years. Again, simple enough. Okay. Let's just quickly go through what from bottom to top, what's been done. In terms of the biannual reports to Congress, never been submitted. And that's the easy part, right? Government seems to be great at making reports all the time. I don't know, but this one they've never made. Not once. Federal lawsuits sued them for the reports. They admitted they've never done it. Hopefully that will change under Secretary Kennedy. Then separately, we wanted to see, on behalf of my client, ICANN, we wanted to see, well, this task force, we want to see all the recommendations. Pharma's not going to do it. HHS should do it. This task force should be making recommendations. Well, guess what? After a lawsuit and then more work, legal work, we found out that the task force had submitted only one report ever to the Secretary of HHS how to improve vaccines. That was in 1998, and then it was disbanded. Apparently, you don't need to make any recommendations. They're safe. Job was done. Even though most of the vaccines on the schedule, by the way, weren't even there yet. Okay. Now, Secretary Kennedy has, as The Hill and others reported, reinstated for the first time since 1998 the Task Force for Safer Childhood Vaccines. And we have provided, on behalf of our client ICANN, a letter to HHS on all the ways that vaccine safety should be improved. And we've asked this task force to please issue these recommendations to the Secretary to be implemented. And with that backdrop, and I'm going to give you one more piece of backdrop and then we're going to get into it, what I want to focus today's presentation on is going through some of those recommendations. We're in DC. I was hoping some folks from the FDA, CDC, so forth might be here. I won't call out. Or maybe there are. Sounds like there might be. And so I figured maybe this was an opportunity to go through the recommendations we were making for changes across HHS and all the agencies. I'm going to go through various ones. Of course, you can read the recommendations in detail at the link below. We'll make this presentation public after today. Okay, one more piece of backdrop, and then we'll start going agency by agency. And I'm going to give you my recommendations, take them or leave them, of how to improve vaccine safety in the United States. But before we do that, I just want to go through the epidemic of chronic childhood disease. The data reflect that in the early 1980s, under 10% of kids in America had a chronic health issue. The data reflect that currently we're over 40%, some data reflect over 50%, and often multiple chronic health issues. The MAHA report reflects the same data points, and it identifies 4 areas that it thinks could be responsible for this increase in chronic health issues. Food, chemicals like PFAS, forever chemicals, which fortunately have been declining since the 1980s, behavior like exercise, and over-medicalization. Like maybe, for example, we've gone from that CDC schedule in 1986, that's what a child will receive on or before their first birthday, to this, what a child would receive following the CDC schedule today, on or before their first birthday. That is the difference. And these are just the routine recommended vaccines. There are others that are not. But let me go back 1 second. The MAHA report, what did it identify? What are the chronic health issues that have exploded? When you look at the list, asthma, ADHD, allergies, atopic issues, go down the list, what you will find is virtually every single chronic health issue that has exploded has an etiology in some form of immune system dysregulation. Even things, for example, like ADHD that nobody thinks of as an what's the immune system got to do with the behavioral issue? Well, go look at the actual biological science, and you will find that children with ADHD have various immune markers that reflect dysregulation. And that's true basically across the board of almost all the chronic health conditions that have exploded. And our federal health agencies can't tell you why these have exploded. Have they studied this? If you're going to look for what might have caused the chronic health, the immune systems of the children in the United States across all religions, racial groups, demographics, whether they're far up north in Alaska or Key West, probably should start with the product you're injecting over and over again from 3 injections on or before the first year of age in 1986, CDC schedule, to now, as of the court's repeal of the recent changes, back to 29 injections on or before the first birthday, including in utero, meaning the mother gets the shot in it. I'm counting a few of those as well. Okay. This just shows you, by the way, this is again, this is 1983. The orange ones are the on before the first birthday. That's the full schedule. So that includes not only the first year of life, but also up to 18 years of age. And this is what it looks like today, up to 18 years of age following the CDC schedule. Okay? They tell you vaccines are a powerful pharma product. They can have systemic effects on your immune system, and we should believe it. And we should also make sure we properly study them. One more piece of backdrop, which is that in 1983, in terms of uptake, just to really give people a sense of where we were and where we've come in this short period of time. In 1983, the uptake of MMR, 1 dose, was 66% in America, 66%. DTP was 65, OPV was 57. It was basically 0 for all the other routine vaccines because they didn't exist. This is the current uptake, over 90% now for the MMR, DTP, OPV equivalents. and very high for many of the others. Okay, so that was a lot of material. That was a lot. So just to encapsulate it, okay, before we start getting into, I would say the details. I feel like I've given a lot of detail already. But we've got kind of, on the one hand, we have HHS responsible for vaccine safety. That includes all its agencies because the companies no longer have the financial incentive to do it. Bucket one. The other thing we have is an explosion in the vaccine schedule. And then we also have an explosion in chronic health issues that have an etiology in immune system dysregulation and dysfunction. And our federal health authorities still can't explain what's causing it. So with that backdrop, we're going to take a look across the agencies on what they've done to rule out or affirm that vaccines are safe, are not causing this epidemic of chronic health issues. And if they haven't done their jobs, I'm going to suggest ways for them to do their jobs. Okay. I want to start with the impact of eliminating liability. I know I've beaten this point, but now I'm going to put some meat on it, which is that what you see right there are, according to Money Inc., the 4 most profitable drugs that Pfizer sells as of 2019 or something like that. It was trying to find a way not to cherry pick drugs, trials. It's the best way I could do it. I found this article that had these, listed these 4 drugs. Well, you could see this reflects the clinical trial relied upon for each of these 4 drug products. You could see that the clinical trial that the FDA relied upon to license each of them were multi-year placebo-controlled trials. Why? Well, the reason I will tell you, it's nothing to do with the FDA, has to do with the fact that the pharma company wants to know if the product is safe before it goes to market. Why? Because if it goes to market and causes substantial harm, what would happen? Lose money. Again, which way do you want your stock to go? Exactly. So it wants to know. This reflects the clinical trials relied upon to license. These are each vaccines given in the first 6 months of life, 3 times each. And what you see is the safety review period, how long safety was reviewed after injection in each of those clinical trials, and what the control was. Who doesn't believe those numbers? I agree. I found it unbelievable the first time I saw it. I said, there's no way. Let's go through it. Here's the Hep B vaccine. Let's just start with the first one on the list. Okay? This is the package insert for Recombavax HB. There's only 2 licensed standalone Hep B vaccines, Recombavax HB and Engerix-B. This is the package insert for Recombavax HB, in which federal regulations require it to summarize the clinical trial relied upon to license it for the purpose of safety in section 6.1. And it says, in 3 clinical studies, this is the clinical trial relied upon to license this product for children. 434 doses of Recombavax HB 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. First time I read this, I thought there's no way this can be it. There's no way they license this product to be given to millions of babies based on that. No control group, not monitoring safety long enough, and not enough kids in it. It's useless. Well, we then FOIA'd the FDA for the underlying clinical trial reports, and use a link right there. Again, you can go look at it, and you can look at the underlying clinical trial reports. That's it, folks. That is what the FDA relied upon. You could also watch me depose Dr. Stanley Plotkin about this clinical trial. Fun fact, when I deposed him, I didn't know he was the principal investigator of this clinical trial. And if you watch the deposition, you see he too seemed surprised when he looked at it that it was only 5 days. Because to me, that reflects how safety is really an afterthought when it comes to these things. You can also look at the FDA petition that we filed to the FDA and said, look, safe and effective, there's probably some gray in that, but No control, 5 days of monitoring, 147 kids. Come on. That's got to be in the black. This is not sufficient. Oh, by the way, the only other Hep B vaccine, Engerix-B, was licensed based on a clinical trial with 4 days of safety monitoring in its clinical trial. Let's do two other vaccines quickly, and then we're going to wrap up on the FDA and move on to the CDC. Prevnar 7, again, given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age to babies, was licensed. There was no Prevnar vaccine, there was no pneumococcal vaccine in the US when this was licensed, meaning there should have been a placebo-controlled trial. There was no ethical reason not to do one. Instead, the clinical trial relied upon to license Prevnar 7, PCV7, had as the control an investigational meningococcal group C conjugate vaccine, meaning another experimental vaccine. I couldn't make that up even if you asked me to. I'd have never dreamed to say that. No matter how, come up with the most nefarious thing ever about vaccines. They licensed it based on another. Which I would never think of that. I would never say 5 days either. It sounds crazy. But there it is. By the way, if you might want to know what the FDA thinks about it, there's a whole JAMA article with like a whole slew of FDA scientists who literally say, prior to licensure, the control group in the main study received another experimental vaccine rather than a placebo, which they go on to lament and say, well, that could mask serious adverse events. They say it. The article's link's right there. You can go read it in JAMA yourself. Well, here's where it gets worse. PCV7 was then used as a control to license PCV13, Prevnar 13. And in that clinical trial, where they reviewed safety for 6 months, in babies who were primarily healthy, they found that serious adverse events, which means something very serious, like death, hospitalization, permanent disability, reported following vaccination in infants and toddlers occurred in 8.2% among Prevnar 13 recipients and 7.2% among Prevnar recipients. In my opinion, that should have made heads at the FDA figuratively explode with concern, because the baseline, what was the baseline of safety? Prevnar 7. Was that proved to be safe? No. Here you have these really high serious adverse events, but because they were similar, for regulatory purposes, it was deemed safe. In the real world, not so much. Then Prevnar 13 was used as the control to license Prevnar 15. And what was found in that clinical trial? Serious adverse events up to 6 months following vaccination with the 4-dose series were reported by 9.6% of the PCV15 Vaxneuvance recipients and by 8.9% of the PCV13 Prevnar 13 recipients. But what did the FDA and the manufacturer say? They said there were no notable parents or numerical imbalances between vaccinations group. Hence, safe for the purposes of licensure, I would argue and submit to you, not safe. Not proven safe for the purposes of the real world. Because it all comes down to Prevnar 7. It's basically a little pyramid scheme of safety, bottom of which your baseline has never been shown to be safe. Last one, DTaP vaccine. There are 2 standalone DTaP vaccines. They were both licensed in a clinical trial where DTP was used as the control. DTP has never been licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial, and later studies of DTP have found that those who get that product die at multiple times the rate as those who do not. While they may have less deaths from diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, they have more overall mortality from things never expected from DTP. This on your screen is a seminal study done when they introduced DTP vaccine in Guinea-Bissau. And what they found is that children that only got DTP versus those that got no vaccines died at 10 times the rate, statistically significant. And there was another study in 2018 with a similar finding, and there's a series of other studies that all make the similar finding. We asked UNICEF about this. We said, hey, and by the way, this is the most common vaccine in the world, DTP. We said, how could you distribute a product where the weight of the science shows that you're killing more kids than you're saving? UNICEF sent us back a review from years prior to this study that looked at the body of evidence, found most of the studies did show a deleterious effect, but said, yeah, but you don't have a study that's not randomized, where OPV wasn't also given, and that wasn't when there was already the vaccine in play for a long time. Well, it was ironic that the UNICEF wrote us back and said that, and pointed to that 2014 review with those 3 arguments, because this 2017 study was specifically designed to address those 3 limitations. I think I just went very fast, but vaccines were given based on birthday, so naturally randomized. They had a group that didn't get OPV, and it was before there was any use of DTP, so not in a post-elimination environment. And in those optimal conditions, they found 10 times mortality, 10 times the rate of death amongst the DTP vaccinated kids. So all available evidence reflects that DTP is killing more kids than it saved. And because DTP is a licensed product, you can't do a placebo-controlled trial that tell you it's unethical, meaning this is the best study the world will likely ever have, ever, on whether DTP vaccine is saving more kids than it kills. But yet DTP was the control for DTaP vaccines used here. Okay, I've given a few examples before I make my bold claim, because if I just went to the bold claim, I'm sure, how many reporters are here? They're going to fact check and say, oh, what I'm about to say isn't true. But I assure you, it is categorically true what I'm about to say, and not because I'm saying it, but because it's what the FDA documents specifically reflect. And if you go to Chapter 10 of Vaccines Amen, you can pull up the FDA document for every single clinical trial. You ready for it? Okay. Here it goes. Not a single routine injected childhood vaccine on the CDC schedule has ever been licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. I'm going to go a step further. And when another vaccine was used as a control, that vaccine was never licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. That is a categorical fact. And for any reporters out there, instead of calling Paul Offit when you run out of here, okay, why don't you actually go to Chapter 10 and look at the underlying FDA licensure documents that we spent 10 years clawing out of FDA's hands for yourselves. But you're not going to probably do that. Anyway, I've implored many reporters to do that. They never do. This chart reflects every single currently licensed routine injected childhood vaccine between birth and 6 months. It shows the control that was used in the clinical trial to license that product. And when another vaccine was used, what was the control to license that vaccine? Down the chain. At the end of it, no placebo. Remember we just did Prevnar 13 right there? Then I went to Prevnar 7, remember? And then I went to another investigational vaccine. We just did Hep B. Neither had a control in the licensure for children. DTaP went to DTP, so forth. The same is also true of all of the routine injected childhood vaccines given between 7 months of age and 18 years of age. Well, I might have to qualify that, because with the judge's recent decision reinstating the old vaccine schedule, COVID vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds, Pfizer, did have a placebo control group. So, Washington Post, you got one. Okay? All right. Again, it's all in Chapter 10. It's all in the FDA documents. Now, even if these clinical trials had a proper control group, a placebo, meaning something inert, they were still virtually useless for assessing safety, because none of them reviewed safety for long enough. Typically up to 6 months. These are all the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life, routine injected vaccines. And you could see the solicited reaction, how long they gathered solicited reactions and how long they gathered unsolicited reactions in those clinical trials. When you're injecting a baby to know whether they have neurodevelopmental disorders, immunological disorders, dysautonomia, you go down the list of the type of things we normally see vaccine injuries causing at our firm, the tens of thousands of folks who contacted us, you're not going to know that for a few years after vaccination. These trials are patently insufficient. So again, even if they were properly controlled, they don't review safety long enough. And then on top of that, even if they're properly controlled and review safety long enough, they're almost always underpowered. For example, 147 kids, even if you reviewed safety for 5 years with a placebo control, if you've only got 147 kids, that's not properly powered to detect virtually anything. It's useless. Okay. I'm going to give you an example of a non-routine vaccine where the company had the financial incentive. Oh boy, we're running out of time. Okay. Dengue vaccine. Dengue vaccine is not routine. You can hold the manufacturer liable. They did a clinical trial in which they had 6 years, basically, for death against the placebo control for 30,000 kids. You know what they found a few years into the trial? Years into the trial. That children under 6 had an increased rate of severe harm and death. So it is not licensed or recommended for children under 6. And for children over 6, what they found is that they never had dengue, they again had an increased rate of death and severe disease. So it is only licensed and recommended for children who have had dengue who are over 6 years of age. What would have happened if they only reviewed safety for even 6 months with no placebo control group? Would they have found this? Come on, let's not speculate. But no, they wouldn't have. With that said, this is the type of clinical trial that you would want. This is the type of clinical trial I believe happens when there's a financial incentive to know if the product's safe. It's just the way economics work. And I will tell you, by the way, had this product gone through one of these safety reviews, it'd probably be on the schedule. It might be a routine injected child vaccine, and you'd be told it's safe and effective. Because how would you find out? How would you know? You can't do a placebo-controlled trial after it's licensed. They tell you that that's unethical. All right. Speaking of ethics, here's what the British Medical Journal says about these trials when they're not properly done. It says, quote, "In some trials, placebos were omitted on ethical grounds. That is illogical because studies destined to produce unreliable results should themselves be considered unethical. And that is true of every single clinical trial relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine." They're all, by this definition, unethical. So here are the reforms I recommend for the FDA. 1, absent public contrition, to remove anyone in FDA's Office of Vaccine Research and Review, the OVRR, involved in licensing any routine injected childhood vaccine. After you have unleashed these products on millions of children and you're in this department and you've been part of that, unless you can publicly admit that you made a mistake, you're going to be too conflicted to properly do your job going forward, respectfully. 2, notify practitioners. The FDA should be sending notice to every single practitioner, pediatrician, family doctor, OBGYN, of the details of each trial relied upon to license each routine injected childhood vaccine. They should know. They should understand. They could just pull up the package insert, but I've deposed endless pediatricians. They don't know. Even after administering, they don't administer it directly, but they have their nurses do it, thousands of these things, and issue minimum standards for licensure of vaccines. And I mean real licensure standards, like what the controls should be, how long safety should be reviewed, proper blinding, so on and so forth. That doesn't exist for vaccines, certainly not for childhood vaccines. There was some guidance put out, actually, for the EUA of COVID vaccines, but that's about it. And then there's a whole bunch of other recommendations in the task force letter below. So these would be my recommendations for the FDA. CDC reforms. I'm going to go pretty quick at this point because we're pretty much out of time. So you might say, well, after licensure, they're thoroughly and rigorously tested for safety. Well, the CDC and HRSA, the agency responsible for administering the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, so if you're injured by a vaccine, you can bring a claim for an injury. You just don't sue the manufacturer. You sue the Secretary of HHS. You see the very same people who claim the vaccine is safe. I'm sure that doesn't conflict HHS from doing safety studies that would show vaccines cause harm. In any event, HRSA and CDC paid the IOM as try as IOM could to please CDC and HRSA to find that these vaccines do not cause what they said are the 158 most commonly claimed injuries from vaccines. That is what HRSA and CDC asked the IOM to review. The IOM said, well, after we surveyed all the existing medical literature, 5 of them we can reject that the vaccine is causally related. For 16, the evidence favors a causal relationship. But for 134 of the most commonly claimed serious injuries from vaccines per the CDC and HRSA, sorry folks, you haven't done your job. You didn't do your job. Studies don't exist for us to reach a conclusion. This alone reflects CDC's not doing what it needs to do in terms of vaccine safety. You don't need more than this. This gets even worse when you look at the studies cumulatively from 1991 to 2021. I'll skip over that. And then I'm going to use autism. I don't want to debate autism, but as the litmus test. It is the issue they say they have most thoroughly and completely studied more than any other vaccine injury. So if they haven't done that well, that probably reflects how well they've studied all the other injuries.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We know that vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
I do not deny in any way that we need to do more about autism, but it has nothing to do with vaccines.
Let me be clear. Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
Absolutely sure.
Absolutely sure.
Okay, so vaccines don't cause autism. And despite telling parents vaccines don't cause autism, when surveyed, 40 to 70% of parents with a child who's autistic still point to vaccines as the cause of their child's autism. And what vaccines do they point to? They point to the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life, these 5 injected vaccines given 3 times each, as well as 1 vaccine given after the first 6 months of life, no earlier than typically 1 age, the MMR vaccine. So you would assume, since CDC says vaccines don't cause autism, they have the studies to show that these vaccines, thank you, don't cause autism. Just so you understand, the controversy around the vaccine started with pertussis vaccine, not MMR vaccine. This is the 1986 Act, the National Child Vaccine Injury Act, and it directed the Secretary of HHS to look at 11 presumably commonly claimed injuries from pertussis vaccine. What's one of the ones it asked HHS to study? Autism. That's in 1986. So it did that. HHS commissioned the IOM, and the IOM in 1991 said, sorry, can't tell you whether pertussis vaccine does or doesn't cause autism because you haven't done any studies, 0 studies. Fast forward to 2012, when the CDC and HRSA again commissioned the IOM to again look at the entire body of literature whether pertussis vaccine causes autism. And what did the IOM conclude again? The same thing. The IOM said, sorry, we could not find any study, 0, to support that pertussis vaccine doesn't cause autism. They only found 1 study on that related to pertussis vaccine and autism, Geyer and Geyer, and that did find an association. So the only study the IOM could find with regards to pertussis vaccine and autism found an association between pertussis vaccine and autism. But what did the IOM do? It threw it out. Why? Because it lacked an unvaccinated comparison population. It's funny how that happens. When the study shows the vaccine, they want to say it's safe. They never throw it out for that reason. Anyway, as the IOM said, the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria, tetanus, or acellular pertussis-containing vaccines and autism. This is me deposing Dr. Stanley Plotkin, the world's leading vaccinologist, specifically about that finding. This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and Tdap cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccine and autism.
If you don't know whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, Tdap does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim?
Absolutely.
Safe and effective. Okay. But we didn't stop there. On behalf of ICANN, we actually sent Freedom of Information Act requests to the CDC, and we said, all right, maybe the IOM can't find it, maybe the world's leading vaccinologist doesn't have them, but maybe the CDC has the studies. After all, it's their claim on their website that the vaccines don't cause autism. And we said, CDC, give us the studies that reflect that DTaP does not cause autism, Hep B, Prevnar, Hib, each of the vaccines given 3 times each in the first 6 months of life. They didn't give us a single study. We sued them in federal court. And days before the initial hearing, we got a list of 20 studies from them. Here's the thing about that list of 20 studies. I called the DOJ attorney and I said, hey, I wanted to say I can read, but I said, we reviewed your list. And this lawsuit's about the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life. The 20 studies, it's actually 16 studies and 4 reviews that you provided, 19 of them have nothing to do with those vaccines. They're all about MMR vaccine or an ingredient that's not in any of these products. And the 20th one is the 2012 IOM report that we just reviewed that looked for all studies relating to pertussis vaccine and autism and only found one that found an association, but they threw it out because there was no unvaccinated control group. I said, are you sure you want to settle based on these 20 studies? DOJ came back, said yes. This is a court-signed, this is a settlement agreement signed by me on behalf of my client, by the DOJ on behalf of the CDC, entered as an order of a federal court in the Southern District of New York, by the way, not in Texas or anywhere, Southern District of New York, okay? If that's meaningful for any of the lawyers out there. So there it is. And that is why I call my book Vaccines, Amen. There's what the public health authorities tell you, and then there's what they have to admit when their back's against the wall in a federal lawsuit. What they have to admit when they're in a deposition. Quite different than what you hear out of the public health apparatus. Okay? Due to time constraints, I'm going to skip over this video, but this is me deposing in a lawsuit specifically about vaccines and autism, Dr. Catherine Edwards, one of the 4 editors of the medical text of vaccines about vaccines and autism. And in this clip, she again says, she's got no studies for any of those vaccines that support they do not cause autism. Separately, broadening out from autism, because again, I wasn't trying to pick on autism per se. I was using it as a litmus test. Autism is the issue they say they have most thoroughly and completely studied, with mountains and mountains of studies, so high, so wide, so vast. There isn't even a number big enough to count them. Remember pi? This went on forever. But they don't have those studies. You only got that when their back was against the wall. If that is the state of the science for the issue they claim to have most thoroughly studied, could you imagine what the state of the vaccine science is for the over 100 serious injuries that parents claim vaccines cause, often neurological or immune-mediated neurological disorders and immune-related issues. Devastating injuries that we get calls about all the time at our firm and represent families for. I'm just going to speed through the rest of the CDC stuff given time constraints, but these are the 4 safety systems that the CDC has. They could be useful to assessing safety, but that's not how they're used. None of them really compare against unvaccinated. It's like most of these systems are basically just comparing smokers with smokers, asbestos exposure with asbestos exposure. They don't want to actually compare exposed to unexposed, which is the way you would do rudimentary science. You can read all about that in chapter 11 of my book. The studies that do exist that compare children that have gotten vaccines with children that have gotten no vaccines, so 0 unexposed to 1 or more vaccines, some of them are small, they have constraints, they're not funded by the government, so they have funding limitations, and they're almost all retrospective, so they're all subject to confounders, but they're consistent. This is a few of them. There's about a dozen of them. I detail many of them in my book. And what you'll find is that these studies all find the children who've been vaccinated all have multiple rates of the chronic health issues that have exploded in the last 40 years as compared to kids that have gotten no vaccines. So I would respectfully submit, or not respectfully, but I'll submit that CDC has not done its job when it comes to vaccine safety. And then, then there's the other side of the coin. What are the benefits? Because that's what you'll often hear. But the benefits are so vast. They're so incredible that we can ignore these kids that we've injured and killed. Their collateral damage. It's like almost like they're, I'll leave it at that. This is an MMWR report that I have cited back to me in every lawsuit I do about vaccines. And what it claims is that this is the most bold claim, that's made about childhood vaccines in America. Nobody makes as bold of a claim as this, so I'm just going to go to the most extreme claim. And what this report claims is that between 1994 and 2023, routine childhood vaccination will have prevented 508 million cases of illness, 32 million hospitalizations, and 1.1 approximately deaths. Whew! That's a lot of life saved, if that's true. And so, we should just ignore the whole safety issue. But is it true? Is it possible that in the same way the CDC exaggerated how much study and work it's done to disprove vaccines cause autism, it similarly has exaggerated these numbers? Let's take a look. First, this review ignores all confounders. I'll read you a quote from it. Factors other than immunization, such as hygiene, clean water, sanitation, antibiotics, acute care, go down the list, anything you want, might have contributed to lower disease risks in recent decades, and reductions resulting from these contributions have not been incorporated into the model. It's laughable science. You don't ignore all the confounders. You're supposed to do the opposite. You're supposed to try and account for all confounders. Okay. It's incredible. The reason they can do this nonsense is because this doesn't go through peer review. It goes through the CDC's internal clearance process. If anybody from the CDC, if you doubt that, go to your own website or read my book where I quote the process to get something in MWR. It has to align with the CDC's policy. And if it doesn't end up in the MMWR. Talk about selection bias. That's why it has no confidence intervals, because it's junk science. And the data is unreliable. Let's go through a few of the diseases. So let's put some meat on the bone of all of those. Diphtheria. This article claims that between 1994 and 2023, 25,000 lives were saved in the United States from diphtheria. That amounts to 750,000 of the 1.1 million lives saved. So virtually all of that claim in diphtheria, something like 70%, right? Well, sorry. Oops, I'm so sorry. Okay, sorry. Well, here's the problem with that claim. It's nonsense. And here's why. Diphtheria vaccine only started being routinely used really in 1949. It's the first year that DTP vaccine was licensed. And in 1948, there were 634 deaths of diphtheria in the United States. By the way, there was also the same number of births, around 3.67 million that year as now. So it's not even like we have different cohorts of children. It's about the same size. But yet, this article is claiming that in 1948, when acute care, when we had parts of this country still like developing countries, there would actually be 25,000 deaths, not 634 deaths. And diphtheria mortality declined by over 97% between 1900 and 1940. This chart on the right was issued by the United States Public Health Service report. It's on the CDC website in 1960. And what you find is that between 1900 and 1926, when the first diphtheria vaccine ever licensed came out, there was an over 80% decline in mortality. So no question, nothing to do with diphtheria. And then from 1926 to 1940s, what the studies reflect, all cited in my book, you can read them, that the parts of the country, because it wasn't widely used, that used the diphtheria vaccine versus those that didn't, had the same reductions in mortality. Hence, vaccine didn't have to do with it. Until you get to the late 1940s. So at best, you're starting there. But somehow, they are claiming 25,000 deaths from diphtheria averted in the US versus a few hundred. You know what's kind of like diphtheria? It's like a lyophilized bacteria like diphtheria, scarlet fever. And they tried desperately to create a scarlet fever vaccine, but never were able to. I submit to you, I'm speculating now, that had they developed a scarlet fever vaccine, you'd be listening to public relations campaigns telling you that scarlet fever is going to kill everybody in America. Everybody's got to get a scarlet fever vaccine. You can't go to school without a scarlet fever vaccine. And why do you want to be a murderer by not taking it? Oh, and 25,000 people a year would die from scarlet fever without the vaccine. Hepatitis B. This article claims there are 3,000 lives saved from 1994 to 2023, which amounts to 90,000 to 1.1 million. Even though in 1980, before there was any Hep B vaccine in America, zero, nada, there were only 294 deaths from hepatitis B. I don't know how he does that math. And then there's measles, where, again, the report is claiming 2,800 lives saved a year in the US from measles. Measles vaccine was first introduced in 1963. The mortality for measles had declined by over 98% between 1900 and 1963. There were about 4.2 million births per year in the years leading up to that. There were about 3.8 million births today. I have no idea how one could possibly claim 2,800 lives saved when back then only around 400 lives were lost to measles a year at a time when parts of this country were still like a developing nation. It ignores epidemiology, statistics, data, fact, reason, logic, and I go through it in my book in detail, but we're out of time for me to do that here on the stage, so I'm going to keep going. Also, I'm not going to review this, but vaccine eliminating measles and mumps, rubella, and chickenpox, these febrile childhood infections, the studies reflect that those that have had measles, mumps, chickenpox, rubella have far less mortality from cardiovascular and cancers. And if that data is true and it's consistent, we are probably well upside down our public health benefit from these products. There might be a reason that unlike other pathogens that have come and gone through the ages, these did not. But out of time, so we'll have to, you'll have to either go to iCanDecide's website or read my book. The benefits are exaggerated. Just this is a list of each of the vaccines that are routine injected, almost all of them. And you could see for yourself the number of deaths the year before. Every death is a tragedy. But if you really want to know the effect that vaccines have, what you've got to do is look at the mortality trend line before introduction of the vaccine and then after introduction of the vaccine. If it's not accelerating, why are you crediting the vaccine? But not only do they credit any reduction after introduction, they credit all of the decline from 1900 on as well. It's incredible. I don't know how vaccines do that. They're magic. Okay, so here are the reforms that I suggest for the CDC. Again, absent public contrition, remove anyone in CDC involved in vaccine safety, misleading reports, or promotion of vaccines. Remove from the schedule all improperly licensed vaccines. Make remaining vaccines shared clinical decision-making. To be clear, before you report that I want to eliminate vaccines, I said remove them from the schedule. I did not say not license them, okay? Anybody should be able to still get a vaccine. It's America, it's freedom. You should be able to take risks you want. but the government shouldn't be promoting them like a pom-pom cheerleader without proper evidence. Bring the vaccine safety data link back in-house and make de-identified data public. That's a database of over 10 million Americans, health information along with their vaccination records. It used to be housed at the CDC. The CDC didn't like that because people could get access to it and actually do real studies. So in 2001, they moved it out of the CDC so that you can't get access to it. That should be reversed. And they should retract every MMWR article, like the one we just reviewed, where de-identified data is not made public within 60 days, including if they don't have data like that article. And then there's a whole host of other recommendations. Moving on to HRSA. HRSA is the agency that's responsible for the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, as well as the CICP. That's for those injured by the COVID vaccine. We have submitted letters to Secretary Kennedy for both of those to amend the vaccine injury table on both, to bring them in conformity with federal law. For the VICP, the statute says anything associated with the vaccine should be on the vaccine injury table. If it's not on that table, good luck getting compensation. It's almost impossible. And so getting it on the table is really critical to get even a modicum of compensation for those injured by these products. We hope that the Secretary and HHS will act on these petitions and update those tables. If not, we do intend to bring a lawsuit, certainly on the VICP one. In terms of NIH reforms, pharma has plenty of money. We, the people, do not need to be subsidizing the development of products for pharma. NIH should be solely focused on the billions of dollars of our taxpayer money to only be invested in root causes, non-pharma interventions, and replication of prior studies. Pharma could fund its own research. We don't need to be subsidizing it. They should prohibit involvement in vaccine development. We should need to leave that to industry. For example, NIH should not have patents on the HPV vaccine, Gardasil. That creates incredible conflicts. And you can see the task force recommendation for more recommendations. In terms of CMS, which administers Medicare and Medicaid, my recommendation would be that there should be no funding for or related to vaccines unless each state respects First Amendment. That means religious freedom as well. Requires all hospitals and clinics to automate VAERS reporting. They can track every vaccine. They have systems to track the movement of every vaccine from warehouse, you name it. But the one thing they can't automate is the reporting of vaccine injuries. Come on, it's already been created. They just don't want to implement it. And then make public all easily de-identified health data. In terms of, by the way, people are like, why would somebody have a religious objection to vaccines? Well, let me tell you, each dose of MMR and varicella vaccine has literally billions of pieces of human DNA and cellular debris from the cell line of an aborted fetus. Again, to all the reporters out there, please look at the links. Okay, don't call Paul Offitch, read it. It's right there, the evidence right there. Okay. I'm going to skip this.
In your work.
My deposition of the man who invented the rubella vaccine, which, because, understand, viruses need to be grown in a cellular medium. And some of the viruses using vaccines are grown on the cultured cell line of an aborted fetus. And you can't just separate the virus from the cellular medium. That's why it ends up in the vial. In terms of HHS-wide reforms, one is that I would very much like it that if you want to be a public servant, be a public servant, which means a commitment to never work in a related industry after you leave your job. That avoids... HHS should be making available to the public all available health data in de-identified form. Of course, we should de-identify, protect everybody's privacy, but it should be made available. There's no reason not to do it. That's what transparency is all about. We should retract all studies where such data is not made public, because it violates basic scientific method. Require all study protocols to be posted prior to funding. I can't tell you how many times in our FOIA requests and digging down, we find changes in the study protocol as it progresses, but it's all behind closed doors. Design a study, post it, implement it, publish the results no matter what they show. That's science. FOIA should be properly funded and timely produce documents and lift the 1986 Act and PrEP Act immunity. For PrEP Act, They're going to kill me for going late. For PrEP Act, Secretary Kennedy could do that with a stroke of a pen tonight, but I don't think the White House will let him. And then in terms of, I can say that, I'm not in government. But I'm speculating. I mean, I know of no other reason. I can't imagine Bobby wouldn't do it left to his own accord. And for the 86th Act, if it's not a routinely recommended vaccine, you again could remove it from the vaccine injury table, and then the manufacturers could finally be held accountable like every other product. But that too, as a federal judge said, ooh, that's not good, and reversed making them non-routine, the 5 of the vaccines, as you all know. We need to care about everybody. We should care about kids who are going to be hurt by infectious disease, but we also need to care about children who are going to be harmed by these products. Every child is worthy of being cared about. And we need to, and let me tell you something else. Thank you. Let me tell you something else. Look, it's the abandoning. There's a reason that people have an issue with vaccines. Not because they just woke up one day and decided they just wanted for fun to take a position that might get them called an anti-vaxxer, a quack, anti-science, get their kids out of school, get them thrown out of their jobs, have them turn against the social circles, have their kids excluded from play dates. Who does that? I don't know. Maybe a few people, I don't know. But most people don't. Not the tens of thousands of families that contacted our firm. It's normal, everyday Americans who did what they were supposed to. They got these products. You know who doesn't call our firm about vaccine injuries? The so-called anti-vaxxers. You know why? Who knows why? They don't get vaccines. Anyway, when you abandon those people who trusted the system, that's what breeds distrust. That's what actually forms the core, the heart of a lot of these groups out there that people talk about, these anti-vax groups. They're often just the families of children injured by these products who have been gaslit and abandoned. Those who don't vaccinate, less so in some respects. Put the safety back on the industry by lifting immunity, depolarize vaccines, and depoliticize vaccines. I agree. We need to get vaccines out of politics. It should be purely medical. And the only way to do that, and mandates. By mandating a vaccine, you make it political. By using the argument, by using the argument that a vaccine is safe and effective to take away somebody's civil and individual rights, you made the safety and efficacy of that product a legal and a political issue.
Yes, they did.
Everybody out there, not going to report that, I know, but that's the truth. That's why statins are not a quote-unquote, don't have the political and legal overlays because they're not mandated. Even though, by the way, heart disease kills 800,000 Americans a year. And so, if you're going to stop clogging the medical system, save the hospitals, maybe you should mandate exercise. You should mandate statins. It's intuitively destructive to individual liberty. Intuitively, but somehow you label it a vaccine, let's take their rights away. Get them if you want. That's freedom. But don't take away anybody's right if they don't want them. And chronic disease. And most vaccines, I didn't go through it in this presentation, I won't because I don't have time, don't stop transmission. Chapter 9. and chronic disease. You want to do that? You got to address vaccines. That's the truth. Because if you look at the weight of the current available data on that basis, and I took the studies that compared kids that are vaccinated with no vaccines, meaning exposed to unexposed, not kids who got smoked 12 packs a day with 20 packs a day. Kids with no cigarettes to 1 or more cigarettes, and you looked at those differences. The weight of that science reflects, if you want to end the chronic disease epidemic, the weight of that science, okay, until there's better science, maybe it'll show that's wrong, reflects that you better address vaccines if you're going to truly achieve the objectives that MAHA has. I'll end with this because I am a lawyer, and so this is my pinned tweet. And I show it to you because, believe it, is that mandates are the tool of bullies, criminals, and dictators. If a patient refuses a medical product after being conveyed its benefits and risks, then that is called informed consent. They were informed and did not consent. Mandating over this objection is immoral and illiberal. Thank you very much.